Hello, and welcome to the Impact series on the Green Builder Media Network. I'm your host, Mike Collignon. On this podcast, I'll have one-on-one conversations with leaders and innovators from a wide variety of disciplines. We'll talk about how they got into their field, the lessons they've learned, and advice they have for future generations of leaders. Today, I'm going to sit down with Deirdre Irwin. She is one of 3 water conservation coordinators for the St. Johns River Water Management District and oversees the Central Florida Water Initiative region. Deirdre has over 30 years of experience at the district. Her work involves administering the Florida Water Star program and assisting with training and outreach for the program. Deirdre works closely with district staff in the development of regional water supply plans and coordinates a utility water conservation group that meets quarterly. Finally, she serves on the boards of the Florida Green Building Coalition and the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and Deirdre won AWE's prestigious Water Star Award in 2024. Deirdre, welcome to the inaugural edition of the Impact Series podcast.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm excited to be here.
Now, our listeners are going to pick up on your accent as we go, so let's start there. How does a woman from Ireland end up in Florida?
I like to be a little bit cheeky and say I did come on a plane, not a boat, but I won't go there today. So after I graduated from university, I had a green card to live and work in the States. And it was a recession in Ireland. I would have had probably leave the country. So I decided to give the US a try. And I had a family friend in Florida who is the director of our Orlando office of the St. John's Water Management District, or Regional Water Management Agency. And when an entry-level position came along, he reached out to me. I said, okay, I'll come. I'll try it for a year, but I'm not staying longer than a year. And that was 1989, and I'm still here.
But time flies when you're having fun, I guess.
Yeah, I've had a great career at the district.
Oh, you have. And we're going to get into that career because it is really something that the people should know more about. But I know, just from knowing you for years now, that you've recently applied for U.S. citizenship. Now, how is that process going?
Well, the application is in, and I received my first notification of having the biometrics interview. So that will be the first step, and then I'll get busy studying for the exam. And having raised 3 children in public school and helping them with social studies homework, I'm hoping I know most of this stuff. But I should have done this years ago. I just put it off, and so I'm kind of excited to be finally taking advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah, I find it really interesting and fascinating, and I wish you all the best in that process. And you move from the Emerald Isle to a peninsula, and one can't help but have water as part of their lives. But you ended up in water conservation. So first of all, what drew you to conservation?
Well, I started my career at the district actually working in wetland regulatory programming. So I attended the University of Central Florida, took a whole bunch of biology classes, and really fell in love with our natural systems in Florida, our wetland systems. So my first job was actually helping residents with permit determinations, sometimes enforcement cases, all related to wetlands. And I did that for almost 10 years in Central Florida. And then my husband's position at the district moved to our headquarters, so we had to move to North Florida. And I always loved the outreach and education component of my work dealing with the public. So a position came available in our communications department, working with primarily teachers, helping them teach about water resources in general. And I did that for maybe 5 years. And then this Florida Water Star thing came along, and they needed someone to run it full time. And as you know, a certification program is kind of like a blend of a regulatory rule and outreach and education. So I feel really fortunate. The timing was excellent for me to get involved with a program that was technical, but really needed a lot of outreach and education for the public and builders and the like. So then I transitioned in full-time conservation and had to learn a lot about irrigation, which I didn't know very much about.
Well, there's a lot of irrigation in Florida. Obviously, the lush landscapes that people kind of think in their mind when they think about Florida. You're entering your 20th year now overseeing the Florida Water Star program. And fun trivia fact for our listeners, Florida Water Star is the longest running water efficiency program in the United States. Yes, it does predate WaterSense. Let's start with, if you could give us kind of an overview of the Water Star program.
Sure. So I believe it was back around 2001 or 2, the certification movement was really gaining a lot of traction. And here in Florida, we had the Florida Green Building Coalition starting their efforts. We were pulled in to assist with the water section. And at that time, our director of communications thought, we should have our own program. So we got busy developing purely a water program, not looking at energy or any of the other components. And it takes time. We hired professors at UF and a few different entities to help us because the district had never done a third-party certification program. We obviously have rules and all the rest, but not certification. So we got tremendous help from folks at UF and from, in particular, Arlene Stewart, who has a lot of knowledge in that area. And we developed the criteria and the support documents of this program called Florida Water Star, targeted primarily at residential water use and targeted at new homes. So our target audience was builders and helping them build a home that was water efficient, low maintenance, and that really a homeowner wouldn't even know their home was different or certified. It just looked like a typical home, but had the potential to use a lot less water.
Let's talk a little bit about the builder element of that. Obviously, you've seen a shift over the 20 years as far as the builder's reception to this type of a program. Can you talk a little bit about the early days and, how was it received by various builders or builder groups that you met with?
Okay. If you remember back to that time period, certifications were new. The economy was booming. We're talking about 05, 06, and the early part of 07. And builders were really looking for a way to differentiate themselves in the marketplace and to have something to show off that they're doing different. And green building certification was the thing with USGBC lead programs, our Florida Green Building Coalition, all were doing extremely well. We had fabulous cooperation. We were involved in some of the International Builder Show that when it was in Orlando with the NAHB Builder Show in Orlando. Those show homes were certified under our program also. So it was really good national spotlight. And then 07, 08 happened. And there was the Great Recession. And suddenly builders were trying to survive and not really, stand out in the marketplace. They just wanted to survive. So we went from a trajectory going up and people were voluntarily participating to suddenly nobody wanted to do Water Star. So those were some tough years. We did, from the early days, always offer free inspections for not-for-profit builders. So those builders were still building during the recession. So we really branched out to some of the low-income builders, Habitat for Humanity, St. John's Housing Partnership, those Florida-based programs, and just continued doing our thing. We also expanded the program. So when it started, it was just the St. John's River Water Management District, which is one of 5 water management districts in the state of Florida. all are part of 18 counties. It's the hydrologic basin of the St. John's River, which flows from over by the coast in Indian River County, all the way, goes out into the ocean in Jacksonville. So we expanded to the other water management districts. We got agreements from them to also offer Florida Water Star. So during that time, it became a statewide program. We added Florida Water Star Gold, so a higher tier, and Florida Water Star Commercial Industrial, so a commercial standard. So we were busy with program growth, program development. The builders were really instrumental in those early years. The Florida Home Builders Association, the local chapters I worked with, because we really wanted a program that was affordable and achievable by builders. So they would review our early criteria and they're like, are you crazy? We're not doing all that extra stuff. And there were some items in there, we're not doing that. It costs too much. So they were extremely helpful in giving us feedback on what they wanted to know exactly. Why does this item save water? And if it made sense to them, they were willing to do it. So I would say the builders were really helpful in those early years.
We're going to get into kind of the evolution of the program in just a little bit, but I think a lot of our listeners would be surprised to know that Florida has a little bit of a water quantity problem. Yes, there's a lot of development and agriculture in the state, but one big factor is sea level rise. Florida's got a kind of a shallow water table, so some of your fresh water is becoming brackish, isn't it?
We've got a few different things going on concurrently. So we have a state. The good thing is we'll never run out of water. We're just constrained on the cheap sources of water. But along our coastal areas for decades now, we have had a sea level infiltration issue with salt water coming in as the large well fields for the cities on the coast would continue drawing water from the Floridan. Our main aquifer is the Floridan aquifer, one of the most prolific in the world. It goes all the way up into the Carolinas and Georgia. As the water became depleted in that aquifer, coastal saltwater would move in. So early on, several of our cities in the teens and even in 07, 08, they were starting to move well fields inland. However, for the rest of Florida, central ridge of Florida continued to use the Floridan aquifer very successfully. But in recent years, with the increase in population, the increase in demands on water, our entire district is now a water caution area. So we have constraints on that traditional source. So 90% of our water comes from that Floridan aquifer. So in our Florida legislature, which I kind of have to brag on a little bit because it was very forward thinking at the time, we have rules that related to water supply planning, that if our water management districts start observing impacts to natural systems caused by overpumping under the ground, so rivers, springs, lakes, if they start showing impacts drawdown, water management districts must develop a water supply plan for that region. So we've got 3 regions: Central Florida Water Initiative, the East Coast Central Springs region, and the Northeast Florida region, North Florida. So our staff, a whole new group of staff came on board and started working on these very detailed plans, which are required to, for the next 20 years, they look at 20 years, determine how much water we're going to need, what the population growth is going to be, what the alternative sources could be, and that includes water conservation. What is the potential that we could achieve by doing water conservation? So that's when water conservation became really a lot more important and quantifiable. And we started working with a lot of entities, figuring out what could be done, how best to implement programming. So we continue on with those water supply plans. I think it was in November, we updated every 5 years, we update those plans with new data, new models on water supply. And the Central Florida region got their plan approved in November. But it takes like 2 years to develop that plan with many stakeholder groups. And the aquifer doesn't know political boundaries. So the Central Florida Water Initiative is a combination of South Florida, Southwest Florida Water Management District, and St. John's. We all work together on this plan with all of our stakeholders. So it's a very in-depth approach. We also look at alternative sources. So one of the more successful ones in the last few years has been the lower Floridan aquifer. So underneath the Floridan, which we've used for forever, we have another aquifer, and we did research and drilled test wells into that aquifer in various locations to see, was it brackish, was it freshwater? And in many parts of our district, it is freshwater. The wells are more expensive because they're much deeper, very in depth, could be 1,000 feet down. But that has become a very successful alternative source for Florida, as well as the use of treated wastewater or reclaimed, what we call reclaimed water. Florida, I think, is one of the most prolific reclaimed water programs in the United States. The state DEP and the water management districts have heavily promoted reclaimed water in all of our local governments.
And the alternative water, yeah, no, because the alternative water part is interesting to me as well, because again, I think for the average person who isn't super familiar with Florida, they would think, wow, they get a fair amount of rain each year. They even get some hurricanes, and they're surrounded by by salt water, which, desal plants exist, and they've got, the Everglades, they've got rivers, and, what water problem would they have?
Yeah.
But yet, you're not only attacking the water problem, but you're also just looking at it in some innovative ways. And as I do, I do work out west and in the Southwest on this topic of water efficiency, water conservation. And I find it interesting that we can share ideas with Florida, which gets way more rain than many places out west, but yet you're looking at some of the very similar things that they're looking out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, because we have so much rainfall and the appearance of lots of water, it actually makes our job really difficult in water conservation, because you have someone who just moved here, maybe from California, and they're like, water restrictions? Why do I have water restrictions? We get 52 inches of rainfall every year. And we're surrounded by lakes and rivers and springs. Some of the most prolific springs in the world are in Florida, in Central Florida. So there's an education, there's a story to be told to explain to them. And I have this one slide I use a lot with these raindrops, and it's the cost of water. So there's the cost of our traditional source and all the new sources. So it's a money problem. It's not a water problem. We're not like Arizona or New Mexico. We have options, but they're just going to cost a little more. And Florida's feeling that a little bit now. And the other thing that happened, which is really worth mentioning, a few years ago, we had some surface water pollution issues. We had harmful algal blooms, and along our coast and in our rivers, it really impacted tourism. So our state government got very active on writing legislation to prevent the historically, you've been allowed to put treated wastewater in surface water, rivers, and the like. Once it was treated, it was disposed of. Now the rules are changing, and by 2030, there will be no disposal in natural systems of treated wastewater, which parallels water supply really well, because we need that source as an alternative supply. So we don't want it going, but the cheapest, easiest way was just to dispose of it. That's not going to be allowed. So for several years, our local governments and utilities have been preparing on using that treated wastewater. So now, in fact, we have several pilot projects in our district just piloting, getting all the kinks out of potable reclaimed water. So that is in the future. We have to do something with this source, and we have a shortage of, potable water. So, our utilities are looking at a few different approaches, maybe pumping it back down into the aquifer to withdraw, blended with aquifer water. Basically, the PR effort is on to eliminate the yuck factor to potable reclaimed.
Yes. Yeah, that was something that was definitely an issue many years ago when this kind of innovation first started showing up. How much conversation is happening in Florida about groundwater recharge?
It's definitely part of the conversation. We do see some utilities are recharging the aquifer with some of their reclaimed water, as opposed to putting it in a river or a lake. Well, it wasn't going in lakes, it was primarily in large river systems. So there is replenishment of the aquifer. We do get that 52 inches of rainfall. So built into a lot of our rules are to protect areas where recharge occurs along the central ridge. The aquifer and the limestone is very close to the surface, very well-drained soils. So that is a natural recharge area. And those areas really do see a lot of pressure to protect for recharge purposes.
And I think for some of our listeners who may not be fully versed on water issues, groundwater recharge is pretty important because you've got potential subsidence issues if you keep pumping water out of the ground and that mass isn't replaced. You can have those types of issues, which can lead to structural failure or structural compromise, not just structures, but also roads, infrastructure, pipes. So it's something that you don't see, but it is pretty important to keep an eye on and to maintain. So
I think a lot of people in Florida are very aware of that potential because sinkholes are very real. And we don't even need to overpump in a drought situation where the aquifer reduces its levels. We often see sinkholes forming. So a lot of people in certain regions of Florida have additional homeowner insurance for sinkholes. So that's definitely a very real part of our limestone geology here.
Now, and I know this from working with you, so I hope you provide a little bit of context as you go into your answer on this one. The shift that you have seen from voluntary to mandatory in some areas of Florida is fascinating to me, given the political proclivities in the Sunshine State. So what drove that shift or that change?
I think a few different things might have encouraged some mandatory adoption of different components of water conservation. We have so something that's different about Florida is who authorizes permission to use water from the aquifer. So there is an aspect to water law in Florida called Florida Water Law. That means the state of Florida regulates use of water from the aquifer. So that's important to understand first. That has been delegated to the water management districts who issue the permits to our local governments, utilities, agriculture, large commercial, even subdivisions, all uses of water, reasonable and beneficial use of water from the aquifer. So we have very in-depth rules about how we allocate water from the aquifer. So as we started seeing constraints and as we had this water quality issue, some of our rules were improved or tightened up a little to mandate certain things happen. So standard in Florida, in your water use permit, you have to do water conservation. So that is already built in. So that's in a way mandatory. Those requirements have become a little stricter in recent years. You have to do things like have a water conserving rate structure to encourage water conservation based on the cost of water. You have to demonstrate that you're only using what you absolutely need based on our allocation. So we look closely at the irrigated areas, the use of the water. We encourage our applicants to really look at ways they can recycle water on the site and reuse it. So I have a great example of that. We have a hospital in Northeast Florida, well-known private hospital, that takes blow-down water from their HVAC system and uses it to irrigate 72 acres of landscaping. So those kinds of approaches are really encouraged through. So that's just regulatory permitting. Then, as local governments started to see that water is becoming constrained and our natural environment is so important in Florida. That's why people visit. That's why they want to live here. So local governments started adopting mandatory codes and ordinances requiring conservation, essentially. So a reduced use of water in the landscape and increased in the quality of the plants, the type of landscaping, all to promote water conservation. So it was happening in a few different ways. Then programs like Florida Water Star had become very accepted as a reasonable program we had a UF study that showed it actually does save water. Really important to do. You can have the best program in the world, but if you don't get in there and quantify and document if it's implemented correctly, it can save water. So we started seeing some local governments in Southwest Florida mandate Florida Water Star in their local code so that they could continue to grow, essentially. They saw the writing on the wall that we do not have enough water in our permit to continue with the growth, the boom we're seeing in Florida. Therefore, we're mandating this highly respected program to allow growth to continue. So that's been a recent, over the last 5 to 7 years, been a big increase in that program.
Now, I want to go back to a question we were talking about earlier. With this shift to more mandatory measures, how has that been received by the builders?
Well, it's funny. Florida already has a very robust building code that they change every 3 years, and it's got a lot of energy requirements. So the building code makes for a level playing field, and we find that's what builders really want. The minute that local governments start adopting this code, and it gets really complex. So with that water quality issue, we started seeing a whole lot of local governments adopting fertilizer ordinances. I'm not going to get into details. I'm not an expert in fertilizer, but there was a belief that they weren't all appropriate. And some of the researchers at the University of Florida didn't agree with some of these ordinances. So residents were having to deal with when they could apply fertilizer, and then builders were dealing with a variety of codes mandated by their local government on how they could build their home with regard to the landscaping component. And I would say it has not been, in recent years, we sense a lot of frustration. And I totally understand. You could be in the Central Florida area, and depending on your local government, have an entirely different way of installing your landscape. So in our conversations, we have been having discussions with the Florida Home Builders Association. They really do want a level playing field. They understand the need. They know there's constraints on water. They obviously want to keep building. So what I'm hearing from them is they're hoping that we can figure out a way to just have a level playing field so everyone is being treated the same way.
And what about, has there been any feedback or have you gathered any kind of input or reaction maybe from homeowners or home buyers?
Very little. They
Okay.
couldn't care less. So a lot
Okay.
of people moving to Florida have never had an irrigation system. So they just, and all of our new communities are HOA deed restricted. So they, trust me, are more afraid of their HOA than me. So they'll do whatever it takes to keep their new Florida landscape looking good so they don't get that letter from the HOA. So we partner heavily with the extension service with the university, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and we're all reaching out to HOAs and homeowners to help them have an attractive landscape and use less water. So it definitely takes a huge village to get to those new homeowners, to tell them you have water restrictions. Overwatering your grass is not going to make it look better; it'll look worse. And you have to stay within the irrigation restrictions. So,
because that was something that just kind of came to mind for me. Was you said, okay, they get 52 inches of rain a year. Is there a need for an irrigation system?
well, unfortunately, we don't get an even application of water from the sky. We have a dry season, and usually the winter is our dry season and the early spring. Our rainy season is in the summer. So you can reduce your irrigation water use dramatically in the summer months when your landscape needs it because we get a lot of rainfall. The tough time really is February, March, April, when we're getting, maybe a half inch to an inch in a month. And everything is suddenly blooming. The temperature has gone up and there just isn't enough water. So it really is of course, you can have a landscape with no irrigation, but your plants may struggle during those months. So it has become the norm now to install an automatic irrigation system in every new home. Hence our problem with water, because there's these irrigation systems educating the homeowner that it's during that dry season, you need to run it. You can turn it off in the summer quite often. And we have dormancy. We have one community in North Florida that kept getting really high water bills because the grass went dormant and brown, and they were trying to bring it back to life all winter. They're like, this is Florida. The grass should be green all year. Well, in North Florida, it's not. It does go dormant.
Right. And that's a natural part of the plant is to go dormant.
Mm-hmm.
It's not,
Yep.
Oh no, it's a horrible thing.
It's not dying. It's just going dormant. It's sleeping. Don't water it. But now in Central and South Florida, it will stay green all year round. So we don't have that. So it's a complex problem. And HOAs complicate it further. They're not always informed on what is they might be informed on the aesthetics of a landscape, but not necessarily on the regional constraints. So one thing we started doing several years ago is offering a free webinar to HOAs with CEUs quarterly to teach the people who manage these large communities about efficient irrigation. And it's been really successful. We get 60 or 70 people every quarter attending, and they come back again and again because there's a lot of information packed in that hour.
Okay. No, I don't think struggles with HOA would be anything foreign to any of our listeners. We deal with that on a variety of fronts, and obviously water being one of them. So you're nearing retirement. Which many in the water efficiency industry are sad to hear. And, we're going to miss you when you do retire. So we're not wishing that anytime soon, but you are approaching retirement. There's a process there in the state of Florida. As you reflect on your career, what do you want the next generation to really take to heart?
Well, I think I've seen an evolution from water conservation being this fluffy thing, a feel-good thing. We'd have a booth, we'd buy some bags or some rain gauges, to being a really significant component of long-term water supply planning. And how we achieve that and how we quantify that is very challenging. But what I have learned and where I've been most successful is by pulling in as many stakeholders as I could. So I run this, we jokingly call it a support group for people who do water conservation. So it's all of our utilities and local governments. We have probably about 60 or 70 people on that email list. And if you think about it, a utility might have one or two people who do conservation full time. And they're not the most popular people in the utility because if they're really good at what they do, they're impacting revenue. So this is a group, it's a safe place where you can come and talk about your feelings about water conservation. And it's very empowering for them. Every time we do it, a different utility hosts it. And they've gotten really competitive wanting to host it. And it's created a network in Central Florida and actually our whole district where you can be very proud of what you do and you get to call out your successes in this meeting. So pulling people in, having those conversations is so important. The builders, same thing. Taking the time to go to those local chapters of the home builder associations, learning from them. These guys are building houses every day. They often have really good ideas. All of the other groups, the professional organizations, and then not to forget civic organizations like Rotary, Chambers of Commerce, all of those folks. And wherever possible, pulling people in to educate them and listen to them. So I would say over the course of my career, I've learned that more than anything else is the importance of our stakeholders and listening to them and staying up to speed on all of the things that are happening around the country and products like your Green Builder magazine and all of the online resources are fabulous. LinkedIn, I learned so much about programs around the country through LinkedIn. Is really important too. So I think they would be some of the more significant things, and just accepting that you don't know everything all the time and being always willing to learn.
And have people around you who are, just as smart, if not smarter.
Yeah, I work with some really smart people, and we have a lot of good exchange within the water management district from some of these experts in modeling and geology and biology and all the rest.
Well, I'm thankful I get to work with a smart person like you. So
I feel like I'm learning every day. No.
Well, it's always a pleasure, Deirdre. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me back. This has been a lot of fun.
Stay tuned for more episodes of the Impact Series podcast on the Green Builder Media Network. I'm Mike Collignon, and I'll see you again soon.